All right, so I've got 2 o'clock, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming out today. My name is Adam Hogan. I'm a security engineer with Cisco, and today I'm going to be talking about malware malware development as the evolution of parasites. And what I've done here is very broadly grabbed some theory on how parasites co-evolve with their host and sort of mapped them to the security life cycle. Sort of notice a lot of commonalities here. So based on that, I've stolen considerably from the biological sciences in order to say, hey, look, this actually applies to security. So let's take these theories, let's take their predictions and see how they work, right? So in that method, we can actually follow the same scientific process and say, okay, well, hey, if these theories really do apply to security, then they've got predictions I can use, and by the way, if they're false, now I can reject the theory, right? So the idea is we'll step through there and take a look at how the evolution of malware, how that changes. So we compare that to epidemiology. The idea that, okay, if we look at things in a broad sense, then a lot of us are working on stopping malware at that level, at a high level, to contain the problem there. I'll also look at some models frequently used in the biological sense to help understand this. Right? So they actually build certain models in order to watch this process unfold. We'll take a look at some of those. And then, of course, always try and bring it back to predictions, right? Because if your theory doesn't have predictions, you're bullshit, right? There's no way to prove you wrong. So the idea is always that at any point I can grab something from this here, okay, if this theory is true, here's what we'll observe, and let's see if we can actually use this to get a better understanding of the world, right? So I am talking broadly about evolution. However, what we're doing is essentially taking the math behind evolution, right? That things change over an iterative attempt where things improve. And what we can do is essentially map this to any process that changes similarly, right? So any iterative process where something learns or changes according to feedback can actually be mapped to an evolutionary process, right? So the way technology changes, the way we learn by doing, right, can actually be mapped as an evolutionary process. Which I want to point out and say, this is just the application theory, essentially the social science, and what we're doing here in security, which is all a way of saying, if anything I say about evolution offends you, it's your fault, all right? It's because you didn't understand what I was talking about. I don't want to hear it. All right. So what we're talking about is sort of how do things evolve, against nature. And if you look at the biological sciences, they're focused specifically in nature, and we hear a lot about that. Even in biology class, you say, okay, well, hey, there's food up top of these trees, so giraffes evolved to have longer necks, right? Camels evolved in a very dry environment, so they have this way of storing water. So we're constantly looking at things, how they react with their environment, with nature directly, right? Dolphins live in the ocean, they get echolocation. I don't, right? I don't need it. That being said, that isn't, nature and your environment isn't what's driving a lot of evolution. Those are neat examples because it's very easy to understand. That's why they're in the textbooks. When you actually look, there's a few factors driving these changes, right, that are pushing natural selection. It's predators, competitors, or parasites. And if you take a look in turn, it'll be my contention is a lot, and again, entirely from biologists who are working on this, that it's parasites that are driving the bulk of the evolution we're seeing. That's a key that's actually driving a lot of changes and the ability to survive, right? And what I'm doing is mapping this to software, right? The idea is, okay, if I'm going to map this, the co-evolution of parasites and hosts to malware, what we're talking about is malware operating as a parasite on another host, right? And of course, the host in this case would be the software we use every day, whatever it is, right? It provides vulnerabilities for the parasite to exploit. If we should look at other avenues of evolution, then we have to start with predators. The idea would be, okay, in nature, that's if one species can see another animal as its source, or a plant really as its source of energy, its source of calories, then they can just take them from there. I'm not sure that we necessarily see that in software. I don't think we have software out there that's out there just to destroy other software, take its spot. Right? I think we certainly have competition, right? There's competition within software. And that could certainly have an effect, right? In nature, we see, okay, another species competing for the same resources, right? There's two different types of animals that are both eat the same berries or nuts in the same location, now competing with each other to take resources that they need to live. In software, yeah, absolutely see that. But we see different brands, different software for all sorts of niches. You have a couple choices in all these things. So I think that's certainly something that could drive evolution. And I think if you were to want to specifically look at how software changes over the time, maybe we're looking at that. However, we're very security focused, and I think in that end we want to focus on parasites. In nature, it's absolutely one of the biggest drivers of evolution. Because if we see the way animals can or can't react to disease, to fungus, to parasitic organisms, that's going to determine whether or not they live or die, right? And I think software has its own parasites there in the form of malware. And if that does match up, then we can learn something from it. I also want to say that it's something we see all the time, and it's often not thought of, but it's huge. Even when we think about some of the greatest catastrophes in human history, and if you look at like World War I and you say, okay, well, there's 25 million people killed or something like this over 4 years. The same number of people were killed in the next 4 months because of the influenza that outbroke afterwards. Because there were so many people operating in unsanitary conditions, coming together, there's that flu that was able to drive just as much death and destruction and much, much faster. And it affects all sorts of lives. My contention is it affects software as well. Now, we should want to lay out some disclaimers there. If you get a little queasy, prone to nightmares, enjoy sushi, don't read about parasites. Right? I haven't been able to enjoy sushi since. Right? It's absolutely terrifying. But just in general, learning about parasites is horrific. This little guy here, the yellow guy in the middle there, he gets inside this fish's mouth, eats its tongue, and then takes its place. Right? So there's a fisherman who got this, opened it up, right? Got a dead fish here, opens it up, tongue still waving at him, hey, how's it going? Because it's a whole other organism that's taking its place, right? Now this guy gets a chance to eat the food this fish eats, and it's actually helpful enough that they get by, right? This animal doesn't necessarily kill the host it's adapting because some of the food still gets through, and it does a pretty good job of keeping its teeth clean, right? So you get this kind of relationship. It's like, yeah, okay, you're stealing my food, but help me out a little bit, and it sort of works. So this guy just lives there now. Right? This is the dreaded Candiru fish. What this guy does is actually a parasite on other fish, and the best place to leach blood out of the fish, apparently, at least if you're this size, is from the fish's gills. Right? Okay, there's a lot of blood vessels close to the top, very easy for it to get there. The way it's able to find gills of other fish is actually by sensing ammonia in the water. Right? It's one of the byproducts of the gills itself, so it gives off ammonia. So this little guy is a homing beacon for ammonia. It smells that, it's going to home in there because that's where it's going to find its meal. Unless, of course, something else smells like ammonia. If you happen to have people swimming in the water, guess what else smells like ammonia? Your urethra. Which is why this guy has been known to swim up them and make a home. Right? Horrifying stuff. I wasn't joking. Alright, so this is an ant infected with the river fluke. The river fluke is epically horrifying. Like, naturally, it's like it is the inspiration for the alien in the movie Alien, and Aliens in this 3, right? It was the river fluke who inspired all of that, because it actually goes to that many, right? It was first, it's the queen lays the eggs, the face hugger, then the drone, right? That whole process, not an original thought. We've got whole sorts of horrifying parasites that actually do that. What they have is called a multi-vector parasite. What we have here is an ant infected by a river fluke. The river fluke wants to make its home in sheep or cattle, right? But how do you do that, right? What's a reliable way to make sure cattle is going to eat your young? So it actually takes a multi-stage approach. The idea being that its eggs are going to fall out. Once it's in the cow, right, its eggs are going to fall out of cow feces. Eventually that's going to get washed into a river where it's born a smaller, completely different vector, where it actually lives in the water. where it's going to be eaten by snails. Snails are then eaten by this ant here. And this ant has its brain hacked so that it will, midday, when it's bright and sunny and things can see it easily, crawl to the very top of these leaves of grass. Not something an ant should be doing if it wants to survive, right? But when it's infected with the river fluke, actually makes home in the ant's brain, it decides, you know what, I should probably hang out up there. If you hang out on the top of grass, you get eaten by sheep or cattle. And that's how it gets back, right? So these multi-vector approaches, and we see this with malware, right? I look at the target breach. It wasn't that, yeah, I just went into their point-of-sale systems. First, I had to get the HVAC vendor in order to pivot from there and go in, right? So we're seeing the same complicated method, and that's not some genius idea humans came up with. Nature's been scary as shit way before we came up with these horrible things, right? So there are literally parasites hacking the brains of animals in order to control their behavior, right? It actually changes their behavior to influence them to get eaten and to kill themselves, essentially, so that they can get their own young to continue on. Right? So I warned you. All right. So if malware is a parasite, then does it fit the basic definition? Does it depend on its host? Right? And I'd say yeah. Any given piece of malware is probably aiming to infect a certain specific type of software. Right? And if you're going to rely on those vulnerabilities to get in, then obviously you have a relationship with that type of software. I'd say that applies. Does malware harm its host? Obviously, right? That's what we get paid, right? And I think ultimately you have to answer, okay, does a piece of software security influence whether or not you would buy it or use it? All right? If that's the case, if you've ever thought, oh, I'm going to use this type of software instead of this one because it's more secure, then I would say then these parasites are having a selective process on software, right? And if that's the case, then we should see, parasites wanting to evolve the same way malware evolving the same way parasites do, to follow this similar process. Right? Have you ever stopped and used one particular browser over another because one's more secure? I say most of us, of course in this room, certainly, but even beyond this, right, we've had people making those kind of decisions. I think that's going to exert a selective pressure on malware. Okay, so what good is it? Is this just an academic exercise for the fun of it? And that's great and all, has its place. But I think there's a lot we can learn from it. Because in fact, I think we follow a fairly specific type of evolution, which I'll go into a bit. And because of that, would allow us to understand this process, but also generate predictions, which of course will allow us to validate the theory, but also use in our day-to-day lives. Help us understand this process, right? I said it follows a particular type of evolution, and what we call that in biology is the Red Queen problem. And there she is, right? It actually comes from Alice in Wonderland. And part of the book here to read is that the most curious part of the thing was that the trees and the other things around them never changed their places at all. However, fast as they were running, they never seemed to pass anything. I wonder if all the things move along with us, thought poor puzzled Alice, and the Queen seemed to guess her thoughts, for she cried, faster, don't try and talk. Well, in our country, says Alice, you generally get somewhere else if you run very fast for a long time, as we've been doing. A slow sort of country, says the Queen. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. And if you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. The idea is if you have evolution following a Red Queen process, if it's troubled by this Red Queen process, then the struggle for existence never actually gets easier, right? So if you look at animals, it's like, okay, that parasite's attacking me. Well, I evolved a way around it. Well, it's just going to come back with a new way of getting in and feeding on me, or whatever they're doing, right? So any progress relative will be relative as long as your foe is alive and depends on you, right? So any advances you make will almost certainly be temporary. So another way of saying it, and that's why I just draw from the Simpsons when I can, it wasn't even a big joke. It was like end of an episode, they said, oh, by the way, they also invested a lot of money in this escalator to nowhere. And it showed a couple of people literally riding an escalator and falling like 10 stories or whatever, right? But that's what security is like, right? Because we're trapped in this Red Queen process, If you come up with great security and then stand still, you're falling behind, right? Or going up. I mean, if it's escalator nowhere, I guess you're going up. I usually think of it as like, okay, if you just stop, you're on the down escalator and you're falling behind, right? But maybe you're just headed for the cliff here, like with the escalator to nowhere, right? But you have to continue moving to even stay in the same place, right? If you say, hey, we've audited our security, our general security score is 80%, whatever metrics you're using, right? If you want to keep it 80%, it's not like, oh, well, okay, we're happy with 80%, let's not change anything for the next 3 years, right? You can't do that. And in fact, think about some of the security vendors out there. If you look at some ones that have fallen to the wayside, that were suddenly popular and not anymore, it's not usually that the vendor's product suddenly changed in a way that sucks now, right? It's that they just stopped getting better. Right? That's what usually happens. When we see people like, oh, hey, they invented this great technology 3 years ago, nothing has changed since, right? It's not that they got worse, they just stopped getting better, and frankly, it's just not that different in security, right? You have to keep improving to even stay in the same place. Like the Red Queen, you have to keep running to stay in the same place. And that's where the name comes from. So we can get some predictions out there, right? And in fields where evolution is a Red Queen problem, we'll have that evolve or die kind of situation. There has to be continuous improvement. I mean, does that, and of course the question then, rhetorically to validate my entire premise, right, is, does that describe information security? I think it certainly sounds what we work on. It certainly describes the problems we're facing, right? So there's no escaping it, right? It's going to continue to be a problem. And it also means that there's no escape. So what else can we learn? Or the quote here, the more successful the parasite's attack, the more the host's chances of survival depend on whether it can invent a defense. The better the host defends, the more natural selection will promote the parasites that can overcome the defense. So now we're operating at a whole different cyclical level. The idea is, okay, if there is someone attacking you, and you're able to come up with a good way to defend it, what happens then? It's not like, okay, hey, great, I came up with a way to defend myself, I'm safe forever, right? What it does is create selective pressure on the people that now can get around that new defense. Right? So the advantage will always be swinging from one to another. The more dire an emergency for one, the better it will fight. So again, the question is, does that describe the security industry? And I think it does. I think we have those types of cycles, right? That malware, a certain type of malware will be a huge news. It's okay, this is affecting all sorts of people. It's a big problem. Of course, now we need more security technology to combat it. We get that security technology deployed widely. And then the attackers come up with a new way of attacking us, right? So you look at sort of the ways hacking is, industrialized. I think we followed exactly that trend, right? So viruses were new and scary, and everybody got antivirus. That didn't solve the security problem, right? They came up with another way to get in. So actually, okay, and then we've got worms making their way around the network. We get, okay, well, now we need firewalls and IDS in place to stop these worms from spreading. Does that solve the security problem? No, we just came up with more and more rootkits when, we got better host defenses, and then we start seeing, I guess we call it ABT, right? Take a drink, but whatever it is we're facing now, we're completely on another cycle where the malware is improving faster, I think, than a lot of security vendors, at least, and that's why we're seeing all this stuff in the news right now. I'd say we're approaching, hopefully, another peak, right? I don't know how much farther we got to go, but I think we're certainly following those types of trends, right? So I think that's an apt analogy to understand the security process and how it's going to change over time. You often hear it called an arms race, right? Like an arms race between, look at the Cold War, right? We're constantly developing back and forth. And that's a pretty good analogy, and I've certainly used it myself. But I think the evolution analogy fits a lot more, right? Because if you look at people defending against malware, it's not that I'm trying to come up with the same type of attacks as the people running malware. It's not that I'm trying to attack them back. I'm just trying to defend myself. That's not an arms race. It's just me trying to come up with a better shield every time they come up with a better missile. You're not running in the same, mutually assured destruction that happens in every other cycle of arms race we've seen before. Instead, it's more like this parasite and host problem, where, yeah, I need to get to a place where I'm not going to be affected by these parasites, but as soon as I do, then any other parasite that can find its way in is going to have the evolutionary pressure to do so. And it's going to succeed and it's going to flourish. In this case, profit, right? Because there's obviously a lot of money to be made right now these days. So let's start stealing some direct theories from biology here. And the first is the life dinner principle. And it says, and it's originally from Professors Dawkins and Krebs. Not our Krebs, right? Different guy, right? But well, they say that, you know, if we look at the fox chasing the rabbit, we have two totally different sets of incentives. The incentive in front of the fox is dinner. The incentive in front of the rabbit is saving its own life forever, right? Two totally different incentives. And when you see a fox chasing a rabbit, more often than not, the rabbit gets away. Right? And the fox says, yeah, okay, I'll go find another rabbit, I'll chase something else, whatever. Right? There's other ways I can track down dinner. For that one rabbit, I either get away from this guy or I die and, you know, stop existing, stop extending my genes on to the next generation and all that. The way biologists have generalized this theory is to say that the specialist usually wins the race, right? The rabbit is evolved to be a specialist in running very, very fast because its life depends on it. So the question we have to ask ourselves, who's more specialized? Those of us working to defend ourselves from malware or the people writing it? What do you think?
Malware authors.
Pretty clear, right? And the people writing malware, that's all they do. All right. How many hours a week do you spend in status meetings? Staff meetings. Singing happy birthday to 12 people who have birthday this month. Whatever the hell it is you do when you work in an office, right? They're not burdened with those things. That's all they do is work for vulnerabilities and exploiting them. There's a whole lot of money to be doing that. Right? So I'd say there's more specialists. So if we are locked in this process, I'd say we may have to accept a framework that says, look, we're going to lose. Right? And in no situation will be 100% protected from malware. It's probably a pretty good mind frame to be in, right? And certainly one we try and encourage through everyone I consult with is that I don't care what security solutions you've got, could be the best in the business. If they're all lined up, they're all working perfectly, they're all tuned, something could still get through, and something's going to get through. Because they are more specialized. They're writing malware way faster than we can write protection for it. So there's always going to be something that gets through, and we have to be prepared for that. Right? All right, so directly, right? What kind of lesson can we take from this? Well, if you're not training your techies, they're falling behind, right? They're on that escalator. And if they're standing still, it means the escalator's whisking them away. Right? So if you're not staying up to date on these things, if you're not learning new things, if you are spending all your time in status meetings instead of learning new technology, you're getting worse every day, right? Just cheer you up, right? Anyone had their training budget cut? Any managers in the room? Because frankly, that's something you can do right away, right? If you are a manager, if you want to know, okay, how can I better my team and stop this from happening? Take it your life missions to keep people out of whatever meetings is possible. Right? If someone else can do it, if they can get a summary afterwards, then fine, take it out of there. Right? And I'm going to start saying, do some more realistic training. Too many people I talk to have a default of, okay, if there's not an incident happening, then my security people are, they default to being sysadmins. Right? Go patch some stuff, go whatever, and if there's an incident, then we'll do security mode. Right? We should be training them better than that, right? We should be doing like fire drills, right? A couple times a year, you all got to walk outside and prove you know how to get out of your own building, because it's important, right? It's not that finding an exit is difficult, it's that important, right? Because the building was on fire. It's something we want to rehearse. You're probably going to be breached at some point. Should be rehearsing for that fact. All right, so the next point I'm stealing, right, is to look at the life cycle of a disease. There's one thing we've learned from studying disease is that they're actually far more damaging at first and tend to get more mild over time. Right? And what happens there is if say a virus is surrounded by unresistant hosts that it can infect, it doesn't need to be worried about killing its host, right? If you're a virus and you're way too successful, you kill the host you're in. But if you're surrounded by people you can spread to, right? If every person you kill, you infect 5 more, you've still got a winning strategy. So as people become more immune, and as you get some security out there, then you have to worry, okay, look, we can't kill the host around. So as we see hosts become more resistant, the parasite has to be careful not, to kill its host, right? So if you can't spread to 5 other people, if you can only spread to 1 or 2, then it's like, okay, let's not kill the host we're in, right? Let's try and make this last. So we're gonna have a longer time to reproduce. Because you also get competition between parasites, right? And so the prediction here is as malware improves, right? As we get more security out there, malware has to improve, right? If malware can infect 100 hosts, a second and spread across the world in a matter of minutes, then if it blue screens a few of them, then no big deal, right? It's successful enough that it's going to do its job. Now, if you want your malware to be a bit more successful, if its job isn't to spread as wide and as fast as possible, if it's only going to be able to get to a few hosts, or maybe it's designed to only affect a few hosts, it's far more important to not damage that host, right? So when we talk about animals, a parasite is damaging when it makes the animal sick, right? With malware, a parasite is damaging if it's causing you to reboot, if it's slowing down the machine, right? If it's making a blue screen. Because if it keeps doing that, sooner or later you're going to take it down to help desk and they're going to wipe the thing, right? So if you are a damaging piece of malware, that could be costly, and it's certainly more so in the long term. So as we see malware evolve, we should actually see better malware. It's actually going to cause fewer performance problems. It's not going to drain your CPU as much. It's not going to make your stuff blue screen. But it's going to be able to get in there real nice and quietly, right? There's I think, a fairly interesting debate in parasitology as to whether or not we should consider the tapeworm an incredibly advanced form of life. The general idea being that parasitologists will say this is the most advanced form of life ever. It is incredibly successful. It does not kill the host at all. You can have a parasite, tapeworm, and never know it, right? You hear those horror stories about people's stomachs like growing and extending because they've got, that's mostly myth, right? If you've got a tapeworm, your body doesn't change at all, and you're never going to notice it, right? Until it leaves, right? That's when people notice. When you're actually infected, no one notices, right? Because it's that evolved, it's that in tune with its host, that it's able to coexist there. And biologists will come back and say, no, this isn't an advanced life form. It doesn't have, a brain. It doesn't have eyes. It doesn't have limbs where it can manipulate its environment. Parasitologists say, well, it doesn't bother with all those ridiculous things. It doesn't need them, right? So they'll say, no, you're ridiculous. This is just a mouth and genitals. And parasitologists say, that's really all you need anyway. So it's, and not even a mouth. It's basically an inside-out stomach. Right? So it didn't even have to go through a mouth to a stomach. It's one big stomach and genitals. And it can reproduce and just hang out. It doesn't have to do anything. Right? So if the idea is just to get your genes to extend and reproduce, then it's incredibly successful at it without having to go to all the bother of walking around and finding food or having to look at things and see what's out there. Right? What a bunch of work that is. Why do that? So I think we're going to start to see more of that from malware. And arguably, that's the whole idea. That's this whole paradigm between seeing APT, right? And is it really that different? No, it's that it has to get better, right? We have to see attacks that are a lot quieter. And if it's going to make the user's system blue screen and die, then it's no good, right? So I think we are starting to see that kind of advancement. So natural question then, okay, well, what do we do about it, right? I mean, if we have a blue team mindset, then the question, of course, well, what can we learn about how nature defends from parasites, and can we use that to help defend ourselves from malware? So let's take a look at the way animals defend themselves from parasites. The first way is try and grow and divide incredibly fast, right? If you can reproduce faster than the parasite can, then you can stay ahead of it. The next one is sex. And in fact, it's well regarded now that the entire reason sex evolved was to deal with parasites, right? And the third would be develop an immune system. So let's take those in turn. Development speed, right? So we're in a situation where, okay, if you can actually reproduce faster than your parasite can, then you're going to be able to change in ways that make it unable to attack you, right? I will evolve to the point where my children will not be affected by you, parasite. That's great. Now, that being said, if parasites reproduce faster than you do, then they're going to chance to change and adapt faster than you can, right? And that's really what we see in parasites in nature. In 10 years, the genes of the AIDS virus change as much as human genes change over 10 million years. Right? They're reproducing much faster. That gives them a lot more selective ability, right? So they have a chance to change how they're doing things and improve or adapt to whatever it is they're attacking, right? So the idea, okay, is malware developed faster than security products? I would say almost certainly yes, right? I guess the question then is, can we do something about that? And I guess the correlator here would be like, okay, can we write software much faster so that we'd have less security to worry about? That doesn't sound like a good idea to me, right? If you were to suddenly go to people writing software and say, okay, well, how long are you going to take? It's going to take a month. No, you're going to do it in a week, and then it's going to be more secure. I don't think that's kind of how it would turn out, right? Unlike reproduction, if you're suddenly coding a lot faster, you're probably going to make more mistakes, which of course turn into vulnerabilities down the line. So I'm not sure that there's a way to steal this idea from nature and utilize it, right? Now, certainly, if your software changes faster, if you have a speedier development cycle, you're absolutely going to be able to respond to security threats faster. But I don't know if you can look at any given software project and say, let's just speed this up and make ourselves more secure that way. People more familiar than me with software development cycle, if you can think of a way to do that, then great, let me know, or go publish it and make a bunch of money, right? But I'm not sure exactly how that would work. Now, there are predictions there, because we should see that malware would be more destructive to a dying host, right? If you've got a host that's already dying, it's like, well, do I have to be nice to it now? Which is why I say we've really got to take a look out for the malware we're going to see coming out for, say, Windows XP, right? The dying host, that's going to happen no matter what. So while we could see a lot of malware improving and getting away from performance issues and blue screens because it's adapting to be better, I don't think we're going to see the same type of pressure and stuff aimed specifically at XP still. All right, it's on its way out. People know it. There are going to be more security patches. So do I have to write good malware for it? We can also compare populations. Something else we can learn from this. And Professor Austin Burt showed a very clear correlation between generation length and the amount of recombination, right? Because you need to change to escape parasites, right? Now, if you reproduce incredibly fast, like, say, bacteria, you don't have to change that much. Generation to generation, you can make small increments, because, of course, we're going to have another attempt to change in the next generation, which is, like, just around the corner, right? So, if you are going to have a longer generation length, we could actually see more recombination. So the question is, do we see that in software? Right? The longer the generation, the longer one organism lives, the more genes should change between generations. So I would say that kind of matches software, right? There are no, what has more new features, comparing IA7 to 8 or comparing, Windows Vista to Windows 7. There are a lot more changes in Windows 7, right? Operating system has a longer generation. It exists a lot longer than a browser does. So in its next iteration, it's going to have to change a lot more. Right? And we're also going to see cycles. Right? If rarity is king, then the advantage will swing from one gene to another. All right, so Professor Tooby writes, parasites must always choose. In competition with each other, they must continuously chase the most common host and thus poison the well against that type of host. So this offers a way to do security, what I'll call security through hipsterism. Right? You can actually look at that and decide, okay, what laptop are you going to buy, right? Well, maybe I get this Mac because so few people use it that it's going to be safer, right? And if everybody switches to Mac, they poison the well, as Tubi writes, right? If a bunch of people all switch to Mac, well, now there's a lot more host for a parasite to attack. There's a lot more incentive for a parasite to evolve to attack Macs, right? So, as Macs become increasingly popular, I will have to, strive to hit that hipster notion and say, whoa, Macs used to be cool, but now they're not. I got to switch to Chrome OS or whatever else is new and very rarely used, right? And then we can go back to saying, okay, well, I don't have to run antivirus because no one's bothering to write malware for this platform I'm using. All right, so how about the next one, right? Can we fix malware with sex? At least from a marketing perspective, you always want to try to get sex in, right? And if there's another talk that's working that gets to talk about sex as much as this one, it's probably disgusting. So I think we're in a good spot. Now the idea is, in nature, sex is complicated, right? It's a great deal of work. If your idea is to just pass on your genes, then you look at primitive life forms, it's like, well, the easy thing is to take all the genes I got, copy them, right? I'll just clone myself, split, I'm done, right? That's easy. It's an extraordinarily complicated process just to bother having to find someone of the opposite sex. It's only 50% of the people out there, right, that you can recombine with. And just meeting them is the end of it, right? There's all sorts of crap that goes on before you actually get to reproduce. That's all complicated. And it's expensive, right? If just cloning yourself were better, that would obviously happen faster. We would want to do that. So why don't animals do that, right? Why don't we just clone ourselves? What's the advantage in bothering with all that sex nonsense? And as biologists have studied it, it's that increase in diversity. It's by recombining genes, your genes with somebody else's, that's going to lead to more of an increment and more of a change. That's going to allow them to end up with a much better immune system than either of its parents, right? So it's that increased recombination that allows animals to outpace parasites, right? They have a longer generation. Yeah, I'm not going to reproduce as fast as bacteria does. But when I do, I'm going to change genes a lot so that we can try and make sure we have a population that can survive attacking these parasites. So the idea being, okay, can we increase diversity in the software you're using, right? If we're going to steal this idea, right? Nature's obviously had a lot of success. All sorts of animals having sex now, despite it appearing at a mathematical level to be incredibly inefficient, right? So there's a process there, right? Can we increase diversity in the genes we have, and can we utilize that process to make sure that parasites can't take us all down? Well, that's a notion that when biologists figured it out, ecologists said, we knew that, right? One of the first principles of ecology is that if you want to survive, you need diversity, right? That if you have just one species, if a parasite figures out how to kill that species, you're done. So let's take a look at the whole bring your own device problem as it compares to ecological stability. Now, everyone bringing in all sorts of different devices is seen as a huge security problem because, of course, it introduces a lot of different ways into the network. It introduces a lot more vulnerabilities that can be attacked. That being said, we have to take a look at two different objectives in security, right? There's data loss prevention and there's operational integrity. And you have to find, how to balance your efforts, right? You have to balance uptime and data loss prevention. And every job you have, every firm you're working for is going to have to take a look at those choices and figure out how much time to spend on either, right? Like if your only goal was uptime, if all you didn't care about losing any data, whatever data we have, I don't care if anyone takes it, don't need it. All we care about is keeping the systems up. Then you wouldn't care about AET, right? It wouldn't matter at all. It comes in, it steals my data, it doesn't affect the systems, they don't go down. Okay, fine, whatever. Right? So we have to balance those two issues. And from that perspective, from the chance of uptime, what BYOD is doing is actually increasing ecological diversity. If you're standardized, you block everyone from bringing in their own devices. You have one gold image that everyone uses. Well, if one piece of malware takes out all of those, you have the potential to lose every system in your environment at once to one strain of malware. Right? So while we are introducing more vulnerabilities by people bringing in their own devices, more points we might not have a lot of control over, it's also increasing diversity, which from the point of keeping the system up and keeping the system alive is actually good news. So BYOD, if you're worried about data loss, probably a huge problem. If you're not, it might actually be a solution for you, right? Because it's actually going to make your network more robust and more resistant to attack. All right, so back to sex. The idea is, okay, can we write software in the same way? Can we change software essentially so that it's written, maybe stochastic isn't the best phrase, but to have some sort of random component to change enough that malware is going to have a more difficult time attacking it. And the real world, I think we've already seen some of that, right? If you look at like address space layout randomization, I think that we've already tried to do this. Operating systems are set up to say, okay, let's randomly rewrite the stack so it's harder for malware to attack it. I have no idea if they were thinking about sex when they wrote that. Well, I mean, you know what I mean? Of course they're thinking about sex, the coders, they just... But were they stealing from this theory? I have no idea. But I think that's what happened, right? We're now in a position where, okay, if my operating system is randomizing the stack, what it's doing is taking that attackable surface and recombining it, right? In the same way that we have sex in order to recombine genes, we're adding a randomization to that process, and it does make the operating system a lot more difficult to attack. All right, so I think we've already benefited from this principle. Right? We also don't get a lot of feedback from that, right? If ASLR works, I mean, great, maybe we buy more of that, but I don't know that we traditionally see a lot of feedback saying, hey, because I randomized this, I protected you. So the way I think we can do this is I don't think software can be rewritten stochastically. I don't think you should be rewriting all your software a couple of times just to make it different. But I think we can randomize what security software we're using. Right? Now, for every company, I think you'd have to look at the ROI here and say, does this make sense, right? Because we normally think, hey, if we want to reduce support call costs, we need one platform that everybody's on so we understand how everything interacts, right? But then we have that diversity problem, right? If malware affects that, then you're out of luck. I think, though, the way to steal this idea, okay, can we utilize sex, would be to randomize your images and the software that people use, and then see what works. Right, and get that feedback loop to see, okay, what platforms are the most secure, and let's go with that. So if you were to literally do this, I think you would randomize what builds people are getting, right? Certain percentage, okay, you're getting Windows machines, you're getting Macs, you're getting Linux machines. People that are using Mac, okay, you're getting Outlook, you're going to use Thunderbird, right? And start to break all that up. So you're going to have, I don't know how many different profiles. So you've got 5 or 10 different combinations of the software people are using out there. Yeah, of course, your support costs are going to go up. You'd have to look at the ROI to balance that with security. But my idea is that if you were to do that, after you were to operate for a couple months, you go and look at your help desk tickets and see, okay, let's take all the help desk tickets. Now let's sort them by the different types of builds we have out there, right? The 5 or 10 different categories we have. If we see that, hey, look, half of the help desk calls, half of the virus problems we've had are all coming from this one build, get rid of that build, right? So rank what builds are the most successful, which ones are having the fewest support calls, which ones are having the most. Get rid of everyone that's using the most vulnerable one, that's had the most problems, and whatever platform has had the fewest support calls, they should get that instead. So you literally take your least successful genes, right? That combination of software you deploy, get rid of it, deploy with the most successful. And that way you wouldn't have to predict what software is the most secure, which one is going to be the safest to use. You could actually rely on the same process evolution does to ensure as things change, you're going to end up there. Which sounds awesome on paper. Of course, I think it'd be fairly costly to go and do that. Of course, now your help desk is like, okay, what platform are you doing? What interactions are there between how many different mail clients and how many different operating systems? So I don't know how many people are going to be able to go and utilize that tomorrow, but I think if someone had a big enough environment where they could get enough data for that process, that it should in theory work. Right? Whether that balances out the ROI, that I don't know. I don't know how costly it is for support to have to adapt to that. Maybe running a help desk is so costly that this could never take off, even if it is a good idea on paper. But I want to look into it more. All right. The last would be we could always develop an immune system. I think that's what we've been working on, right? Of course, it's very complicated. We only see it with reptiles and things that are like as advanced or more. And one thing we can learn is that the immune system is always adaptive. Right? If you're going to have an immune system that's going to work, it's able to change a lot faster. That's the whole idea, right? Your genes can't change, so your immune system needs to be that much more responsive and adaptive so that it can respond to threats for you. We can actually map this out as some fairly formal models. And scientists use mathematical models to describe a process. And say, okay, look, this is the basic process here. It follows this simple equation, and if this is true, let's take a look at that and see what happens. Okay? The idea is to formalize this in a simple language. You can argue whether or not math is a simple language, but in an international community, it's a pretty easy way to write down an idea and say, I think it follows this idea, because that would take you 3 pages of language to try and describe, right? And now we can rigorously explore that, right? If you have an opinion in language, we've got to talk about all the different ramifications. If you've got a model you can write as a math equation, I can now poke at it and say, okay, well, if this variable is this, what happens? That's nonsense. Look, your old value, this all falls apart. This isn't realistic. So now we can start to calibrate that model to real life and see if it's useful. And of course, it makes predictions that can be tested, which of course we want to see if the theory is at all useful. So one of the first is called the Locke-Volterra model. And the idea is if we look at the number of hosts and the number of malware that exploits it, that's what I'm using. The original model is actually looking at populations of sharks and fish and how they were interacting because they were seeing these wild changes in populations. So it allows us to define, okay, we're going to use 2 differential equations, one for each, right, host and populations, and they interact with each other. So we can see, and we can have our parameters here, where alpha is the growth rate for a given piece of software without any malware, right? We want to look at the impact of malware. How damaging is it to the growth of a piece of software if there is malware affecting it? The death rate of malware, if there's nothing to infect, right? If there's nothing new to spread to. And then delta being the response of malware to the size of the population, right? How much more is it going to grow if there's a lot more people to infect? If we take that, though, we can sort of rearrange it now and say, look, okay, if malware is growing, right, then dy dt is greater than 0. If we set that inequality, now we can rearrange the equations we set and say, okay, if that's true, then this equality is also true. And without getting into the specific parameters, what it's essentially saying is that malware grows if its infection rate is greater than the rate at which hosts are killing, right? So I can rewrite that in natural language, of course, and you may say, look, then I didn't need the math. But now we can go around and maybe start to plug in these numbers, right? Let's figure out what each of those parameters are. How fast does malware grow? Get that percentage, put it in here, and now we can start to map that out. But when you actually get the map, now we can graph it and see what it does. And it was because they did this model that they were able to do this. With sharks or with fish or with rabbits or coyotes, we've seen the same process. So this is something that biologists weren't able to explain. They knew that rabbits were having this cyclical pattern, and like the number of rabbits that existed was following this model here, like this blue line. And then the population exploded and then collapsed. Well, and they were looking just at the population of rabbits. Okay, well, what changes in rabbit mating habits, right? What changes in its diet over time? And they were missing it because they weren't looking at its predator. And what happens here is that as the population of rabbits explode, there's a whole lot more food for coyotes. When coyotes have a lot more food, they have a lot more baby coyotes, right? Then the population of coyotes rises. And once it grows, they start eating a lot of rabbits, and the population of rabbits collapses. Once there are very few rabbits around, there aren't enough rabbits for the coyotes to eat, and they start to die out of it. And it actually continuously follows this process. So now we can start to map that and start to look, okay, would malware follow the same issue, right? So for one thing, if we are going to follow this type of process, we can see that, okay, we are free from malware at 1 extinction, right? That's a way to solve malware. is to have the host die out completely. Right? Not the solution we want, but as one. We can see that there's also a stable equilibrium at this parameter. So if we can actually get the values for those variables, we should know where we'd have a more stable population of software. But we also know there'll be periodic fluctuations, right? So that if a ton of malware affects certain software, we're going to stop using it. And if people stop using it, then right, if we have the number of systems out there grows, it's going to become a more attractive target for malware. So this is actually a plot showing those cycles. The idea being the farther out you are from the center, the more wild cycle you're going to have. The faster you're going to have those amplitudes, ups and downs that the rabbits and foxes were having. So if we can parameterize that, we might be able to find out how fast those periods are. And then I think we want to start to think about what's the difference between a physician and an epidemiologist. A physician is pretty focused on solving one particular host, right? You go to a doctor, it's like, how do I get you cured, right? Epidemiologist looks at the entire population. How do I, maybe I'm not trying to cure one host, maybe I'm trying to save the herd. And we understand that curing people is costly, so we're always trying to look for the most efficient way of doing that. And I think you might want to stop and think about what is your job more entailed to. Right? Are you a physician who's working on the help desk day-to-day trying to secure APC that comes in? Or are you an epidemiologist trying to set up a particular safe network at an architectural level that's going to be more resistant to malware? But as we look at those models, we're actually able to model out this basic epidemiology model. It says, okay, certain populations are susceptible, they can become affected, and then they recover. Well, if we model that out, we got three different equations to model, okay, whether you're susceptible, affected, or recovered, and whether you move between those. And again, we can start to recombine based on this math. And we say, okay, if the amount of malware out there is decreasing, what's true? Well, then this equation out here will be true. And what they've done is they've recombined that equation to what they call R sub 0, or R0, or R naught. And what it is it's the basic reproduction rate of an infection. And it's one of the key components epidemiologists look like to understand an outbreak. So if you look at rabies, the R sub 0 is 2.44. That is, every one person who's infected with rabies will, on average, infect 2.44 people themselves. Right? So the higher the R0, the more serious the epidemic. Right? Where you get into like whooping cough there, which is like 16 to 18. That's enormous. Malaria was originally estimated between 50 and 100 people. But that was largely because they didn't understand the differences between different strains of malaria. If you make that distinction, it's more like 6 or 7. So one thing we actually do is, if we were, actually, by watching the growth rate of malware, estimate its R sub 0, and again, take a different perspective, right? So this is actually incredibly, like farmers' almanacs publish a table of diseases that affect cattle and the R0. The idea is if you have that R sub 0, you are able to say, okay, based on that, I know how many groups I need to split my cattle into to make sure it can't spread very quickly, right? Because even if I can't vaccinate every cattle, if I can't fix the problem, I can at least isolate them into specific groups to make sure it won't spread. And we also know it will have periodic fluctuations. Again, we'll see that over time. So one thing to keep in mind is if you're fighting malware, if you're in this first downslope, you might say, hey, this is great, it's on its way out. And next week you see the number of help desk tickets climbs a little bit. Right? You may still be making the same progress. You may just be on the upswing of the cycle. Right? So watch those day-to-day metrics. They might be lying to you. Because if we see infections take the same pattern, we should see these oscillations in the number of people infected. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed through that. Only to identify that one thing we really learned from modeling STDs is that it's incredibly important to look at high-risk patients. Right? So this is a particularly useful social network map, where they actually mapped out everyone in a particular high school in Colorado who had slept with each other. Right? So if you'd slept with another person, you got a line drawn between you. Right? There's also been an incredibly successful paper mapping this out for airline attendants. Right? Because it turns out that finding high-risk people is the ballgame, right? If you want to stop the infection of STDs, one of the solutions is actually to have everybody have more sex. If everybody were to have more sex, STDs would not spread as fast. And it's counterintuitive, but it's because the current way STDs are being driven is that there is a small set of high-risk people that are infecting a lot of other people. So if there aren't many people out there having sex, and you go to the bar to pick up a one-night stand, there's a higher chance that that person is filthy. If more people were to have sex, then we're bringing out more people who are not having quite as much sex. So if you were to sleep with instead someone who doesn't get around as much, you're actually a lot less liable to pick up an infection. So it's not that we need more sex, but if on average everybody were to have more sex, we'd actually see less spread of STDs, because now there would be more people on the fringe of this graph having more sex, and if they were, you'd be a lot less likely to pick up an infection. I say this because we need to identify those high-risk people. If you have a security problem and you ignore your high-risk users, it almost doesn't matter what else you do. Right? So we can actually map that out and say, okay, maybe I can't vaccinate everyone. Maybe I can buy, there's some great new security product and I can only get it on maybe 40% of my host. Well, do you want to pick 40% at random? No. You want to identify your high-risk users, because if you're able to do that, I'm really low on time here, so I'm flying through now. Because if you look at that, here's actually a map where we say, we'll take those equations, and here's the results. If we are on the left side of that blue line, we're going to fail. The idea is I want to vaccinate a certain percentage of high-risk hosts, that's on the bottom, and a certain percentage of total hosts on top there. And what this shows you is that if you vaccinate less than, 20–30% of your high-risk users, it doesn't matter how many of your other users get the security product and get protection, right? If your high-risk users are unprotected, that's the ballgame, because they're the one bringing infection in and spreading it to everyone else, right? So if you can do anything to identify your high-risk users, the people that are most likely to click that phishing email, and you can give them protection, you don't need to buy security for every host out there. You can actually target them and have a greater effect on your security platform at a lower cost. And I'm really running low on time there, so let me stop and ask any questions. And we've got a break after this for like a half hour. So you can raise your hand or come up after. I'll stay till all the questions are answered. Yeah, so I got almost 3 now. So. Okay. Well, if you've got any other questions, feel free to hit me up after this. And I'll be right back. Thank you, guys.